And you thought that was some kind of demonic sound. It's just a goose, man. It's okay. I'm here to talk about this book. Just finished it. Grady Hendrix's My Best Friend's Exorcism. Very interesting book. I highly recommend it. I recommend this author. This is the first novel of Grady Hendrix's that I've read. I believe Grady Hendrix is a man, but if I get that wrong, my apologies. So I'll call him a he. I might be wrong, because I've looked at some of Grady's other books, some of Hendrix's other novels, and there are a lot of female protagonists. It may just be a male author who writes a lot of female voices. Anyway, very, very strong narration, very strong story. Love the style of the book. It all takes place in the 1980s. And this version of the book, of the cover, it's kind of done like a 1980s yearbook, like a high school yearbook, because it takes place with a group of high school friends, 4 girls who were friends in high school in the 80s. And I feel like it's got just enough 80s imagery to it to feel real, to feel authentic. I like, maybe not to the extreme of, I don't know, Stranger Things, and I like Stranger Things, but sometimes, it can be a bit much, a little heavy-handed with like every single thing reminding us we're in the 80s here. We got Halloween and E.T. and everything. Some of these 80s nostalgia series and movies, sometimes they remind me a little of the movie Anger Management, Adam Sandler. And, the opening scene is a flashback of his childhood. It has the date like 1978, but they're kind of purposefully ham-fisted about it. Like Adam Sandler's character, as a little boy, goes up to a girl he likes, and she's like, I like your Dukes of Hazzard t-shirt. I like your Chips t-shirt. And they've got roller skates, and they're just really emphasizing this is 1978. But here it feels more natural in this book. But of course there are a lot of song lyrics. I'm sure it wasn't cheap for the publisher to reproduce, because there are a lot of song references, band pop culture references. And of course the most significant thing here is the Satanic Panic. And that's the context of this book. The book is about possession and exorcism, maybe, and there are some questions there that's part of what's cool and interesting about this book. Now I'm standing here. There might be a little noise from the ducks and geese. I'm here by the lakeside. I'm in California. This is Lake Murray. But I decided this would be a fitting spot because the crux of the story, the most significant thing that really sets the action into motion, it happens in a spot like this, a lakeside home by one of the characters, where one of the characters, they own this home by a lake. It's set in Charleston, South Carolina. So in the book, there's a moment when these friends, it starts off developing their friendship, establishing the relationship, and the key moment is when they decide to drop acid together. And so they go to a friend's lakeside home, and eventually it's nighttime. They decide to go skinny dipping, and they all drop acid. One of the girls disappears off into the woods. This might be a spoiler, but it's in the first 50 pages of the book or so. And so this girl goes off into the woods, and we don't know what happened to her. Something horrible happened. She comes back kind of catatonic, and that's when this transformation starts to happen. And that's when she starts to show these signs that people associate with demonic possession. Now, a big question with a book like this that deals with that topic is always, how is it handling that topic? Is it treating it like something that literally exists? Does the universe that this story happens in that universe, are there actual, literal, conscious evil spirits that possess people sometimes? And I'm still not sure. And I think that, I'm not saying that to spoil anything. I don't think that will spoil anything, because it's not the point of this book to discuss that, or to examine that question of whether or not this is a literal phenomenon that happens. And again, that the context is set in the 1980s Satanic Panic. If you don't know about that social phenomenon, it was a time for years and years where the entire country, the US and Canada and other countries, became convinced that there were these enormous organizations of Satan worshipers, devil worshipers, that were kidnapping kids, abusing and murdering children. And this was this enormous conspiracy of just millions and millions of super powerful devil worshipers, kind of similar to some of the QAnon mythology that exists today. But at the time, it wasn't just a fringe group. It wasn't just a conspiracy theory. It was taken as gospel truth. In the 80s, you had, secular law enforcement, schools, academics of all stripes that assumed this was true. And it was sort of a mass hysteria, mass panic. It's a satanic panic. That's where the title comes from. And it took years and years for anyone to question that narrative, and to question that official version that, yes, of course there are devil worshippers operating out of preschools and schools, and they are kidnapping children and killing children by the thousands. Of course this is happening. Why would you question that this is a reality? And it took years and years for enough critical voices to push back against that. So that's the context of the book. Now, in that context, in fact, at a point in the book, the characters watch an episode of Geraldo on TV. And this is a real episode that I think you can find it on YouTube even. A 2-hour special he had about Satanism, about these supposed cults of devil worshippers, which now we know they just plain didn't exist. None of them. None of it could be documented or proven. And the few tiny groups out there that actually called themselves Satanists, and to this day there are some small groups that call themselves Satanists. They don't do any of those rituals. In fact, most of them don't even believe in God or the devil in any kind of literal way. They're atheists. So that the whole massive conspiracy of devil worshippers straight up didn't exist in the real world. Now, in the book of the novel, maybe it does. But I kind of view this as a lot more like Eggers' film The Witch, where the point is not to look at history with a critical eye. It's more to look at that time in history the way people experienced it at the time. So at the time, the way people were living and experiencing their reality was that this was real. This danger of demons and devil worshippers and witchcraft was a real thing. And there's a reference to a girl who was ritually killed in the book, and try not to spoil too much, but that's just sort of subtext for, she was supposedly buried somewhere near this lake where they go off to drop acid, where the girl has her strange traumatic experience that then leads to this possession, or what seems like a possession. And so yeah, I'd compare it to the Witch, and also even in the series Vikings, the way they handle the mythology and the supernatural experiences people have, where people encounter the gods. They see Odin, they see the gods in the flesh on Earth, because that was the world that the Vikings lived in at the time. It wasn't just a story or a book. It was this reality that surrounded you. And so they just sort of depict that in Vikings uncritically. And I think that's what this book is doing. I also think it's using the metaphor of possession, and I think the idea of possession as a metaphor can be very powerful. I think as a literal concept, it can be extremely dangerous. I'll be honest on my own perspective. I myself, I'm a Catholic Christian. I do believe in God. As far as a literal devil, evil, I believe evil is real, of course. You can't deny, just look at what happens in the world. But as a literal demons and devil, and does that kind of possession happen in a real literal way? I don't know. I'm more on the side of no. I'm not sure. I don't think it's critical to faith. It shouldn't be critical to faith. And I think that concept can be really severely abused when people treat something that would better be serviced with psychological help or with family counseling or, abuse treatment or substance abuse treatment. When they treat that as a literal demon that you just need to pray away, well, that can be extremely destructive for obvious reasons. But I think as metaphor, it's very, very powerful. And in the story, there's kind of this suggestion that maybe what happened to this girl, I've forgotten. There's Gretchen and Abby, and I'm forgetting who is who. Abby and Gretchen. Yeah, Gretchen is the girl who has that strange encounter and then shows signs of possession. And there's a suggestion that maybe Abby is her friend who's trying to get to the bottom of it, trying to help her out. And there's this idea that maybe what happened to her was actually a sexual assault. And the language of possession, of demonic possession, and the language of rape, of sexual assault is very similar. So in that sense, I think it can be a powerful metaphor for something that wicked, something that dark and evil and destructive, where just the language of psychology and human dynamics just doesn't cut it to convey how horrific that can be. And people who've gone through that often have this dissociative experience where they feel like they're seeing themselves from the outside, or like there's this alien presence in their body, because that's a fact that happens a lot with people who have an experience that's so traumatic that it takes years of effort and work to process the fact that you went through this thing. And so I think on that level it's powerful. And also the language of describing someone's neurosis, someone's problem, as something that's not part of them. I think that kind of language is powerful, especially for a lot of kinds of mental illness and addiction, especially. When you have a loved one who has something else, whether it's an addiction or even an addiction to a toxic relationship or a person, and when they are dealing with that, it becomes like something that's alien to them, where you can't even see your loved one anymore. You can't even see who that person is, who she is, because this other thing has come in and taken over. Whether it's this controlling boyfriend or partner, or whether it's an addiction, a substance. Sometimes the only language that works is language of a demon, of something else that's not human, that's not this person. And sometimes it's even helpful to talk to them in that way and say, this is not you, man. Whatever the words I'm hearing coming out of your mouth, that's not you, that's something else. People who treat eating disorders use that kind of language a lot too. They call it ED, eating disorder. And I've spoken with therapists who've worked with eating disorders and talk about that being helpful, referring to ED as this other thing, saying, no, this is not what you want, this is what ED wants. The skinnier you get, the fatter Ed gets. I mean, they wouldn't say skinny and fat, but, personifying this sort of disembodied, malignant force that takes over a loved one. Sometimes that's the only way that we can really describe it. So this book, I think it explores those themes in a very adequate way. And again, you don't get hung up on the question of literally, is this literally happening or not? Just enjoy the story, enjoy the horror of it. I think it ends in a satisfying way. I won't spoil anything with the ending, but I was happy with it. Again, My Best Friend's Exorcism, Grady Hendrix. This is the hardcover cover. There's another cover out there that I like a little better, because it's done sort of like a movie poster from the 80s. There's a lot going on, like one of these action movie posters where there's just all these details, and there's owls and creepy faces, and it's just really intense, and it feels very 80s. But put on some Duran Duran, put on something really 80s to listen to, sit down, curl up with the book. Maybe you don't do it too late at night. It will creep you out a little bit. And I'm going to check out this author. Everything else that Grady Hendrix has written, definitely going to check it out. Let's get a shot of that sunset by the palm tree, just like the palm trees in Southern California near Charleston.